Mom, please don't ask me what happened. David, you're sitting on a cold bench with my grandson asleep on your lap and 3 garbage bags at your feet. I am going to ask. She locked us out. Who locked you out? David looked away from me like the answer itself had teeth. Laura, he whispered. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The parking lot behind Miller's grocery was almost empty. The sun had already dropped low, and the evening air had that sharp bite that comes before rain. My son sat on the wooden bench near the bus stop, wearing the same grey work jacket I bought him 2 Christmases ago. His beard was rough, his eyes were red, and his little boy, Ethan, was curled against his chest with one hand gripping David's shirt like he was scared someone would take him too. Beside them were 3 black garbage bags. Not suitcases. Garbage bags. One had a ripped corner, and I could see Ethan's blue dinosaur pajamas poking out. Another had shoes pressed against the plastic. The third looked heavy, like somebody had shoved a whole life inside it and dragged it out the door without care. I parked so fast my tires scraped the curb. I came out of that car with my knees shaking, not because I was weak, but because something inside me had already started to burn. David, I said softer this time, where is your car? He rubbed his forehead. She took the keys. Your phone. She broke it. Your wallet. He swallowed. Inside the house. I stared at him. You mean to tell me your wife locked you and your son out with nothing but 3 garbage bags? He closed his eyes. She said the house isn't mine anymore. I let out a small laugh, but there was nothing funny in it. It was the kind of laugh a woman gives when her heart has just been slapped, and her anger is trying not to show its whole face. The house isn't yours anymore, I repeated. David looked up at me quickly. Mom, please don't do anything. Oh, baby, I said, and I touched Ethan's hair. I am already doing something. He shook his head. I mean it, don't make it worse. Worse than this. He didn't answer. That silence told me more than his words. I sat beside him on the bench. The wood was cold under my coat. Ethan stirred a little and I whispered his name. He opened his eyes just enough to see me. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. His little mouth trembled. Daddy said we're camping. I looked at David. He looked down. I smiled at Ethan because children should not have to carry adult pain. Well, if we are camping, then Grandma brought the best car in the campground. That made him smile a little, but only for a second. Then his face fell again. Mommy was yelling, he whispered. She said Daddy lied. My eyes moved back to David. What lies? David's jaw tightened. Not here. That was when I knew this was bigger than a fight between husband and wife. I had seen sadness in my son before. I had seen worry, disappointment, even heartbreak. But this was different. This was fear mixed with shame. A grown man trying to look strong while the floor had disappeared under him. I stood up and grabbed one of the garbage bags. Get in the car. Mom. Get in the car, David. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, then looked down at Ethan, sleeping again against him. I leaned close and lowered my voice. It is time she found out who she was dealing with. David stared at me. There it was, a flash of something in his eyes, not hope exactly, Maury-like panic. You don't understand, he said. Then explain it. I can't. You can. No, Mom, his voice cracked. I can't because if I do, everything falls apart. I stood very still. The rain started with small drops, soft at first, landing on the garbage bags like little taps. David, I said, everything is already falling apart. He turned his face away, but not before I saw the tears. My son was 36 years old. He was a good father, a hard worker, and the kind of man who still brought my trash cans up from the curb without being asked. He had loved Laura with that steady kind of love that looks boring to foolish people, but feels like shelter to those who understand it. Laura never liked me much. She was polite when she had to be. She smiled at family dinners. She brought store-bought pies and acted like she baked them, but her eyes always watched me too closely, especially when I asked simple questions. Where did she work before she met David? Why did she never talk about her parents? Why did she get nervous anytime I mentioned old family friends from Eastbrook? David said I was being protective. Maybe I was. But a mother knows when something does not sit right. I loaded the bags into my trunk. David carried Ethan to the back seat and buckled him in. The boy was still half asleep, his cheeks wet, his hair stuck to his forehead. When David got into the front seat, he smelled like cold air and stress. I started the engine. For a while, neither of us spoke. We drove past the grocery store, the pharmacy, the church with the white steeple, and the diner where David used to eat pancakes after baseball practice. The whole town looked normal, like nothing cruel had happened. That is the strange thing about pain. The world does not stop for it. Finally, I said, "Tell me one thing, did you hurt her?" David's head snapped toward me. "No." "Did you cheat on her?" "No." "Did you gamble the money away?" "No, Mom." "Then what lie is Ethan talking about?" David pressed his palm over his mouth. His shoulders started to shake. I pulled the car over near the old post office. "David," he whispered, "she found a folder." "What folder?" He shook his head. "I thought I destroyed it years ago." My chest tightened. "What was in it?" He looked at the windshield, eyes wide and empty. "Birth papers." I waited. He did not continue. "Whose birth papers?" He turned slowly toward me. "Mine." The sound of the rain got louder. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at my son. My son, who had my late husband's smile, my father's stubborn chin, and the same little scar near his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike at 8 years old. "What do you mean, your birth papers?" His voice came out rough. "Not the ones you gave me, the other ones." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain. "David, what are you saying?" He leaned back and shut his eyes. "I found them after Dad died, in the lockbox in the garage." My hands tightened around the wheel. My husband, Richard, had been dead for 6 years. He was a quiet man, not perfect but decent. At least that was what I had believed. He kept every receipt, every insurance paper, every old warranty card, like the world might end if he threw away proof of a toaster. But there had been one lockbox he never let me touch. He said it held army papers and old tax files. I believed him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. David opened his eyes. "Because the papers said I wasn't supposed to know." I could hear my own heartbeat. "What papers, David?" He swallowed hard. "Adoption records." The word hit me like a door slamming in my face. For a second, I could not see the street. I could only see David as a baby in my arms, wrapped in a yellow blanket. I remembered counting his fingers. I remembered Richard standing beside my hospital bed, smiling too wide. I remembered being tired, confused, and told I had been given medicine because the birth had been difficult. I remembered asking why everything felt blurry. Richard said, "Rest, Margaret, you have your baby now." "My baby." I whispered no. David looked at me and his face changed. "You didn't know." I turned to him slowly. "You thought I knew." He covered his face with both hands. "Oh God. David. I thought you and Dad hid it from me." "No. Mom, the papers had your signature." The car suddenly felt too small. "My signature." "Yes. I never signed adoption papers." He stared at me. "Then who did?" Before I could answer, Ethan stirred in the back seat. "Daddy." David wiped his eyes quickly and turned around. "I'm here, buddy." "Are we going home?" David looked at me. I looked out at the rain. "No," I said gently, "not tonight." Ethan sniffled. "Is Mommy mad because of me?" "No," David said at once, "never because of you." The boy nodded, but I could tell he did not fully believe it. Children hear more than we think, and they blame themselves for storms they did not create. I drove again, slower this time. Every memory in my head started rearranging itself. The hospital room. Richard's strange silence. The nurse who would not meet my eyes. The doctor who retired suddenly 2 months later. And Laura. Why would Laura throw David out over adoption papers? Why would she care unless those papers threatened something she wanted? I asked him, what exactly did Laura say? David's voice went flat like he was repeating a nightmare. She said I had built our marriage on a lie. She said I wasn't who I claimed to be. She said the house, the accounts, everything connected to the Morrison family was stolen. My mouth went dry. Morrison. That was Richard's last name. My married names. The Morrison name came with more than family photographs and old furniture. Richard's father had left land, rental properties, and a small but valuable share in a local construction company. After Richard died, some assets went to me. Some were placed in David's name because Richard, Will said so. Laura had always cared too much about that will. I remembered her at the funeral, holding David's hand with one hand and asking the lawyer questions with the other. At the time, I told myself grief makes people strange. Now I was not so sure. Did she ask you to sign anything? I asked. David hesitated. My stomach dropped. What did she ask you to sign? She had papers on the kitchen table. What kind of papers? I don't know, transfer papers maybe. She said if I didn't sign, she would tell everyone I was a fraud. I hit the brake so hard David grabbed the dashboard. She threatened you. He nodded. And you left. She was screaming, Ethan was crying, then her brother came over. Mark. David nodded again. I never liked Mark. He wore expensive watches and cheap smiles. What did Mark do? David stared out the window. He said I had 5 minutes to take what was mine before he called the police and said I broke in. I whispered, in your own home. David laughed bitterly. That's what I said. We reached my house 10 minutes later. I told David to take Ethan inside, get him warm and find him something to eat. My hands were calm now, too calm. That kind of calm had carried me through my husband's funeral, my mother's stroke, and the day I found out my best friend had been stealing from our church fund. It was not peace. It was preparation. Inside, I made hot chocolate for Ethan and grilled cheese for both of them. My grandson sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket, dipping his sandwich into tomato soup. David barely touched his food. I watched him from across the kitchen. You still have the papers? He nodded, copies, not the originals. Where's? He looked down, in my work locker. Good. Mom, I don't want revenge. I leaned against the counter. You think revenge means screaming, breaking things, and acting like the people who hurt you? That's usually what it means. No, I said, that's foolishness. Real revenge is truth with good timing. He looked at me. Laura threw you out because she thought shame would make you weak. But shame only works when the truth belongs to her. We are going to find out what truth she is so afraid of. David's eyes filled again. I don't even know who I am anymore. I walked to him and placed my hands on his face, the way I did when he was little and feverish. You are my son. Whatever those papers say, that part does not change. He broke then. He leaned forward and cried like a boy, and I held him while Ethan watched quietly from the table. After a while, Ethan said, Grandma. Yes, baby. Can Daddy sleep here? I smiled. Daddy can sleep here as long as he needs. And me. You too. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his soup. That tiny question nearly finished me. Later, after Ethan fell asleep on my couch, David gave me Laura's number from memory. His own phone was broken, but mine worked just fine. I did not call her. Not yet. Instead, I called someone I had not spoken to in almost 6 years. Hello, a woman's voice answered. Caroline, it's Margaret Morrison. There was a long silence. Then she said, I wondered when this day would come. My skin went cold. Caroline used to work as a records clerk at Eastbrook Memorial Hospital. She had been friendly once before Richard's death, before she moved away without a proper goodbye. What day? I asked. Her voice trembled. The day you found out about the baby. I gripped the phone so hard my fingers hurt. What baby, Caroline? She breathed shakily. Margaret, she said, David was not adopted because you could not have a child. My knees weakened and I sat down slowly. Across the room, my son slept in a chair with his head tilted back, exhausted. My grandson slept under my quilt. Rain tapped against the window like fingers asking to be let in. Caroline whispered, "Your real baby did not die that night." I stopped breathing. She began to cry. "Richard lied to you." "Say that again." Caroline did not answer right away. I could hear her breathing through the phone, shallow and broken, like she was standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. "Margaret," she whispered, "I have carried this for 36 years. I stood in my kitchen with the lights low, my son asleep in the chair, my grandson curled under my quilt, and the whole world I trusted breaking apart piece by piece. My baby did not die, I asked. No. My hand went to my chest. I remembered that night in Eastbrook Memorial Hospital. I remembered pain, lights, voices, Richard's hand squeezing mine too tightly, then darkness. When I woke up, he was sitting beside me with red eyes, telling me our baby girl had been stillborn. A girl. I had held nobody, I had kissed no tiny forehead. Richard said it was better that way. I was young, I was weak, I believed my husband. Now Caroline was telling me my daughter had lived. "Where is she?" I whispered. Caroline cried harder. "I don't know where she is now." "You do know." I knew where she went then. Richard made arrangements. He said you were unstable, that another child would break you, that the family name had to be protected. "The family name," I said. My voice sounded strange, even to me. "Yes, he told the doctor you had signed papers. He showed documents. I was just a records clerk, Margaret. I was young too. I knew something felt wrong, but everyone acted like it was legal." I looked at David, sleeping with his mouth slightly open like he did when he was a boy. He was innocent in all this. He had been placed in my arms while another child was taken from me. "What about David?" I asked. Caroline's voice dropped. "David was brought in 2 hours later." "Brought in from where?" "A private home. A young woman had given birth and wanted the baby hidden. Richard knew her family." My stomach twisted. "Who was she?" "I only heard a first name." "What name?" Caroline paused. "Evelyn." The name meant nothing to me at first, then slowly it did. "Evelyn Price. Richard's secretary. Young, pretty, quiet, always wearing pearl earrings, always lowering her eyes when I came into Richard's office. I remembered the way she disappeared from town that same year. Richard told me she moved to Ohio to care for an aunt. My mouth went dry. "David is Richard's son," I said. Caroline did not answer. "Caroline's..." "Yes," she whispered, "that is what I believe." I shut my eyes. The room tilted. So Richard had stolen my daughter, given me his son from another woman, and let me raise that boy in love while burying the truth under papers and lies. I should have hated David for 1 second. I did not. All I felt was a grief so old and deep, it had been waiting for me in the dark. David woke when he heard the chair scrape. He lifted his head and saw my face. "Mom..." I could not speak. Caroline said, "Margaret, there is more." I pressed the phone to my ear. "Tell me." "The woman who arranged the private adoption of your daughter was named Helen Whittaker." My eyes opened. Whittaker. Laura's maiden name. Laura Whittaker. David stood slowly. "Mom, what is it?" I looked at him and suddenly Laura's anger made sense. Her fear made sense. Her rush to throw David out made sense. This was not only about David's birth papers. This was about my missing daughter. "Caroline," I said, "was Helen Whittaker related to Laura Whittaker?" "I do not know, but I remember Helen had a son named Mark. He was just a child then." My blood went cold. Mark. Laura's brother. The same man who had stood in David's house and threatened to call the police. The same man who helped throw a father and child out with garbage bags. I thanked Caroline and told her I would call again. Then I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. David came closer. What did she say? I looked at him for a long moment. I knew whatever I said next would hurt him, but silence had already destroyed enough lives in this family. Your father lied, I said. David swallowed. About what? About everything. He sat across from me and I told him slowly. I told him about the baby girl Richard said had died. I told him Caroline said the baby lived. I told him David was likely Richard's child with Evelyn Price. I told him Helen Whittaker may have helped hide the truth. David covered his mouth and stared at nothing. So I'm not yours. I reached across the table and grabbed his hand. Do not say that. But it's true. No, blood tells one part of a story, love tells another. I fed you, I held you, I raised you, I prayed over you, you are my son. His tears came again, but this time they were quiet. Then Laura knew. I think Laura knew enough to be scared. David shook his head. Why marry me then? That is the question. We sat there until the clock ticked past midnight. Ethan slept through it all, safe for the first time that day. I wished adults could sleep through pain the way children sometimes do. The next morning I took David to his workplace before sunrise. He worked at a hardware warehouse on the edge of town. His manager, Frank, knew me and let us in through the side entrance. David opened his locker and pulled out a brown envelope taped behind a loose metal panel. His hands shook when he gave it to me. Inside were copies of old records. A birth certificate with David's name. A private placement form. A page with my signature at the bottom. Only it was not my signature. It looked like mine at a glance, but I knew my own hand. The M was wrong. The tail on Morrison was too short. Whoever signed it had copied me, but not well enough. This is fake, I said. David looked at me. You're sure? I am sure. Then I saw another page. A receipt. Payment made to Helen Whittaker for family placement assistance. $10,000. In 1989, that was not small money. At the bottom of the receipt was Richard's signature. Beside it was a witness signature. Mark Whittaker. David leaned over my shoulder. That can't be Laura's brother, he would have been a kid. No, I said, maybe his father. David frowned. Laura's father was Mark Sr. There it was again. The same family name circling the same secret. I folded the papers and put them back into the envelope. We need a lawyer. David shook his head. Laura will go crazy. She already did. She'll take Ethan. I looked at him. Not if we move first. By 9 that morning, I was sitting in the office of Daniel Brooks, the best family lawyer in town and the only man I trusted to keep his mouth shut. Daniel had known Richard for years, but he had never liked him. That gave me comfort. Daniel read the papers twice. His face grew darker with each page. Margaret, he said, this is not just a family matter. I know. This could involve fraud, forged consent, illegal adoption, inheritance manipulation, and possible coercion. David sat beside me, pale and silent. Daniel looked at him. Did your wife try to force you to sign property transfer papers? Yes. Did she say you were not entitled to the Morrison assets because of these records? Yes. Did she deny you access to your home, wallet, phone, and child's belongings? She put Ethan out with me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we act today. I felt something hard settle inside me. Not anger. Purpose. Daniel filed an emergency petition to stop Laura from selling, transferring, or draining any marital or inherited assets. He also filed for temporary custody protection for Ethan, since Laura had thrown the child out of the home. While Daniel worked, my phone rang. Laura. I stared at her name. David whispered, "Don't answer." I answered. Margaret, Laura said, her voice sweet as spoiled fruit. Is David with you? You know he is. He needs to come sign some papers. No. A pause. Then her sweetness cracked. Excuse me. I said no. You do not understand what he has done. I understand more than you think. Her breathing changed. What did he tell you? Enough. She laughed, but it sounded nervous. David is not who you think he is. And who are you, Laura? Silence. That silence gave me joy, not happy joy, the clean joy of knowing the snake heard your footstep. She lowered her voice. Stay out of this. You threw my grandson into the street. I protected myself. You put a child's pajamas in a garbage bag. He is David's child. And that made him disposable. She said nothing. I leaned closer to the phone. Listen to me carefully. You wanted David scared, you wanted him ashamed, you wanted him alone, but you made one mistake. What mistake? You left him where I could find him. I ended the call. David stared at me with wide eyes. Mom, what? That was terrifying. Good. For the first time since I found him on that bench, he almost smiled. That afternoon, Daniel sent a legal notice to Laura. By evening, the house, the accounts, and the company shares were frozen. Laura could not move anything. At 7:30, she showed up at my front door. Not alone. Mark stood beside her. He was tall, polished, and angry. Laura wore a cream coat and held a leather folder against her chest like a shield. I opened the door but did not invite them in. David stood behind me. Ethan was upstairs watching cartoons with the volume low. Laura looked past me at David. You made this ugly. I laughed once. You packed a child's clothes in trash bags, but we made it ugly. Mark stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, this is a legal family issue. I looked at him. Then you should stop standing on my porch like a hired bully. His face hardened. David moved beside me. I'm not signing anything. Laura's eyes flashed. You will after you hear what we know. I folded my arms. We already know about Helen Whittaker. Laura froze. It was small, but I saw it. Her fingers tightened around the folder. Mark recovered faster. That name means nothing. Then why did your sister stop breathing when I said it? Laura looked at him. Mark. He turned to her sharply. Be quiet. That told me something too. Laura was cruel, but Mark was in charge. David noticed it as well. What did your family do? He asked. Laura's eyes filled with tears. For 1 second, real fear came through. I didn't know everything at first, she said. Mark grabbed her arm. Stop. She pulled away. No, I'm tired. Mark's voice dropped. Laura. She looked at David. I married you because Mom told me to. The porch went silent. David stared at her. What? Laura's face crumpled. She said the Morrison family owed us. She said your father destroyed our family and hid money that should have come to us. I whispered, your mother. Laura nodded. Helen Whittaker is your mother. No, Laura said. Helen was my grandmother. My heart pounded. Then who is your mother? Laura looked at me. Your daughter. Everything stopped. David took 1 step back. I gripped the doorframe. Laura began to cry, but Mark cursed under his breath. My mother's name is Grace, Laura said. Grace Whittaker. She told us she was abandoned as a baby. She said the Morrisons stole her birthright. She said David had to pay. My knees almost failed me. Grace. My daughter had a name. My stolen baby had lived, grown up, and had children of her own. Laura was my granddaughter. Mark was my grandson. And David, the son I raised, had married into the bloodline Richard stole from me. The betrayal was no longer a straight line. It was a knot tied around every person standing there. David looked sick, so you knew we were connected. Laura cried harder. I knew after we were already married. Mom found the old records. She told me not to leave. She said if I stayed close, we could get proof and take back what belonged to her. You used me, David said. I loved you at first. At first. She looked away. That answer hurt him more than any scream could have. Mark stepped forward. Enough, we came for the papers. I looked at him. You are not getting them. His smile turned cold. Then maybe little Ethan should know exactly what his father is. David lunged, but I held out my arm. No, I said. Mark looked pleased. He thought he had found the soft place. Then a small voice came from behind us. Daddy. We all turned. Ethan stood halfway down the stairs in his socks, holding his dinosaur blanket, eyes wide with fear. Laura's face changed. Ethan, baby. He backed up one step. Why did you put my clothes in garbage bags? Laura opened her mouth, but no words came. That was the first time I saw shame touch her face. Before anyone could move, my phone rang again. It was Daniel. I answered with shaking hands. Margaret, he said, you need to sit down. What happened? We found Grace Whittaker. My eyes went to Laura. Laura stared back at me. Daniel's voice became low. She is not in Ohio like Laura claimed. She is here in Eastbrook, and according to the court record I just found, she has been declared missing since last week. Missing? Laura's face turned white before Daniel finished the sentence. I held the phone so tight my hand hurt. What do you mean Grace is missing? I asked. Daniel's voice stayed low. A neighbor reported that she had not been seen for several days. Her car was still in the driveway, her purse was gone, no clear sign of where she went. Laura grabbed the doorframe. No, she was supposed to be with Aunt Denise. Mark turned on her. Shut up. That was the moment everything became clear to me. Mark was not just angry, he was afraid. David stepped forward. What did you do to her? Mark pointed a finger at him. Watch your mouth. Ethan started crying on the stairs. Laura moved toward him, but he ran behind David and held his leg. That broke something in her. She covered her mouth and whispered, I didn't want it to go this far. I looked at her, then talk. Mark grabbed her arm again, but this time David stepped between them. Take your hand off her. Mark laughed. Now you want to protect her. David's voice shook, but he did not move back. I'm protecting the truth. Laura looked at him, then at me, then at Ethan. And finally she spoke. My mother found the records 3 years ago, she said. She found out she was born to you, Margaret. She found out Richard Morrison gave her away and replaced her with David. She was angry. She wanted answers. She came to me because I was already married to David. I could barely stand. My daughter came to you. Laura nodded. She wanted to meet you, but Mark told her to wait. He said if she came forward without proof, everyone would call her a liar. Mark cursed under his breath. Laura continued. Then he started talking about the property, the company shares, the house, everything Richard left behind. He said David had lived the life that should have belonged to Mom. David whispered, so you stayed with me for money? Laura cried, at first yes, but then Ethan was born and everything felt different. I kept telling Mark I wanted out, I wanted to tell you, but he said if I did, he would ruin David, ruin Mom and take Ethan away from me. I stared at Mark. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. You people are dramatic, he said. This is about justice. No, I said, justice does not throw a child into the street. Mark looked at me. Your husband stole our family's future. My husband stole my child too. That silenced him. I stepped closer. You are not the only one who lost something. Mark's face twitched. Then Daniel spoke through the phone. Margaret, keep them there if you can. I have already contacted the police. Do not confront him alone. Mark heard enough. He turned to leave. But before he reached the porch steps, 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house. Laura sank to the floor and sobbed. Mark ran. He only made it to the sidewalk before an officer stopped him. The next hours were heavy and confusing, but the truth came out one piece at a time. Grace was found that night in a motel outside town. She was alive, scared, and exhausted. Mark had not harmed her physically, but he had taken her phone, hidden her car keys, and pressured her to sign papers giving him control over any claim she might have against the Morrison estate. He told her she was too emotional to handle things. He told her David and I would destroy her if she came forward. That was his lie. He did not want justice for Grace. He wanted control. He wanted the money, the land, and the company shares. He used Laura's pain, Grace's anger, and David's shame to get close to everything Richard left behind. When Grace came to my house 2 days later, I knew her before she said a word. She had my mother's eyes. She stood on my porch with trembling hands and grey in her dark hair. She was not the baby I lost. She was a grown woman who had lived a whole life without me. "Margaret," she said. I could not answer. She started crying. "I was told you gave me away." I shook my head. "I was told you died." She covered her mouth. We stood there, 2 women robbed by the same man, and then I opened my arms. She stepped into them like she had been walking toward me for 36 years. David watched from the hallway, his face full of pain. Grace saw him and froze. For a moment, nobody knew what to say. Then David stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he said. Grace shook her head. "You were a baby." "So were you." That was the first honest bridge between them. The full truth was plain now. Richard had an affair with Evelyn Price. Evelyn gave birth to David and wanted the scandal hidden. At the same hospital, I gave birth to Grace. Richard, with help from Helen Whittaker and a dishonest doctor, arranged for Grace to be taken away and placed with the Whittaker family. Then he brought David to me and made me believe my daughter had died. Helen Whittaker raised Grace, but she also filled her with bitterness. Years later, Grace told Laura the story and Mark twisted that pain into a plan. Laura married David at first because her family wanted access to the Morrison estate. Later, she fell into fear, guilt, and greed. When she found David's hidden papers, she panicked. She and Mark tried to force him to sign over property before the whole truth came out. That was why revenge became necessary. Not revenge with fists. Not revenge with shouting. Revenge with truth, lawyers, court records, and consequences. Mark was arrested for coercion, fraud, and unlawfully keeping Grace from leaving freely. More charges followed when Daniel found old forged documents linked to Helen Whittaker's files. The court froze every asset Mark tried to touch. Laura lost the house temporarily, then later lost primary custody because she had put Ethan outside to pressure David. David did not celebrate. Neither did I. Real revenge does not always feel sweet. Sometimes it feels like finally taking a knife out of your back and realizing how long you had been bleeding. Laura came to apologize weeks later. She stood in my living room, smaller than I had ever seen her. "I hated the wrong person," she told David. David nodded slowly. "And you hurt the right people." She cried, but he did not comfort her. That was his growth. He could forgive one day, maybe, but he no longer confused pity with love. Ethan stayed mostly with David. Laura was allowed visits, but only under clear rules. She had to attend counseling, cooperate with the court, and stop contact with Mark. Grace and I did not become mother and daughter overnight. Life is not that simple. We were strangers with the same blood and the same wound, but we started. We had coffee every Sunday. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we cried, sometimes we sat in silence because 36 years is a long time to lose. David remained my son. Grace became my daughter. Ethan became the little boy who somehow held all our broken pieces together. One evening, months later, we all sat around my kitchen table. Ethan was eating cookies and telling Grace about dinosaurs. David was fixing my cabinet door because he still could not sit still in my house without repairing something. Grace looked at him and smiled. "You really are her son," she said. David looked at me. I smiled. I told him that. He laughed softly, about 100 times. Ethan raised his cookie. "Grandma says truth has good timing." Grace looked at me. "Does it?" I thought about the bench, the garbage bags, the rain, the phone call, the missing daughter, and the woman I became when they pushed my family too far. "Yes," I said, "but sometimes truth needs a stubborn old woman to drive the car." They all laughed then. Even David. Even Grace. And for the first time in a long time, the laughter did not feel like hiding pain. It felt like healing. Before I end, please like, comment, and subscribe if this story touched your heart, because every family has a truth, and sometimes one voice helps bring it into the light. Richard's lies destroyed many years, but they did not get the final word. Mark wanted money, he got a prison sentence. Laura wanted control, she lost trust and had to rebuild from nothing. Grace wanted to know why she was abandoned, she learned she had never been abandoned by me. David wanted to know who he was, he learned he was not a mistake, not a fraud, and not a stolen life, he was loved. And me. I found my son and grandson on a bench with 3 garbage bags. I thought I was rescuing them, but that night the truth also came to rescue me.